Hello everyone, my name is Michelle. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to episode 22 of Crime Stories Sunday. And in this episode we are going to 19th century Liverpool. A city not far from me. It's about 30 miles of where I currently live. And this case is very interesting to me because I had an ancestor, my 3 times great grandmother, lived in the slums of Liverpool. She was a cellar dweller, which were the lowest of the low, absolute abject poverty. So this story is quite poignant to me in some ways. So infamous were the crimes of the 19th century slum dwellers, Catherine Flanagan and her sister Margaret Higgins, that their crimes have echoed down the years as horrific. But perhaps just another example of the desperation people experienced at that time and in that place. Many cities in 19th century Britain had slum districts. These were the main places where the poor existed. We can't say that they lived, they just merely existed, scratching out a living. My 3 times great grandmother was a cleaner, a char lady, eking out a living. And my 2nd times great grandfather, Edward Lowe, he was born in the slums of Liverpool. The origins of the city of Liverpool date back to 1207, when King John issued letters advising of a new town called Liverpool. In its early days, Liverpool is just a really kind of small town, and it would remain a relatively small and unimportant town on the northwest coast of England until its rise to prominence in the 18th century as a prosperous port, thanks to the transatlantic slave trade. Its position at the mouth of the River Mersey and out to the west, past the Irish Sea, past Ireland, and then straight across the Atlantic to America, gave Liverpool a really kind of boost in its popularity and its prosperity. Liverpool and its rich inhabitants derived great civic and personal wealth from the trade, and that laid foundations for the port's future growth, which continued well into the 19th century. Liverpool as a city became wealthy, and a number of major buildings were constructed to reflect this. And 1846 saw the completion of the architectural triumph, the Albert Dock. And my 2nd times great grandfather, Edward, on his birth record, his father was listed as a mason. So I wonder whether he had some contribution in the buildings of Liverpool. But I don't know, I can't find any information out on that. But the wealth of Liverpool did not extend to all of its inhabitants. Many people migrated there to hopefully make their fortune, or at least to escape certain starvation and death. The housing was mostly damp court dwellings where whole families lived in one room, as was the case with my 3rd times great grandmother, with one toilet to serve a whole street, and the only available water from a solitary fountain in the street, which was often contaminated with sewage, and just the disease and the desperation there is horrific. You know, we can't imagine it today. And the slums of 19th century Liverpool is where we now turn for this murderous story. We're meeting 2 sisters who lived in Skirving Street, which stood and indeed still stands at the east side of one of the major fairways through the city of Liverpool, Scotland Road. The 2 characters in this sordid story, the sisters, Catherine and Margaret. Both were Irish by birth, and like many people from Ireland, they escaped the potato famine and certain starvation. And many people moved to Liverpool and surrounding areas in the 19th century to try to just create a better life for their families. But they ended up in these slum dwellings, so they had to eke out a living just existing there. Catherine Flanagan was born around 1829 and her younger sister Margaret around 1843. Both must have suffered terribly in their early years due to the Irish potato famine. and as I said, along with thousands of others, found themselves in Liverpool to escape the starvation in Ireland. Our story begins with Catherine in her 50s and Margaret in her 40s. So they embarked on this crime spree quite late on in life, but they embarked on a plan to make money from life insurance and burial societies, policies that you could take out to ensure that there was enough money to pay for your funeral and that you could be assured of a good send-off. In 1880, Catherine and Mary Flanagan, both unmarried at the time, ran a rooming house at 5 Skirving Street. So what they'd do is they'd rent a house in these slum districts and then they'd sublet. So they'd rent out rooms. And as I said, sometimes entire families lived in just one room. Catherine and Margaret's household consisted of them, the 2 sisters, Catherine's son John Flanagan, and 2 lodger families. So these families were rooming with the Flanagan sisters. And this was Thomas Higgins, his daughter Mary, Patrick Jennings, and his daughter Margaret. In December 1880, John Flanagan, Catherine's son, aged 22 and previously healthy, died suddenly. His death didn't raise any major concerns or major comment, because the poor, even the healthy poor, died all the time because of the many diseases that circulated in the slums. His mother Catherine collected £71, which is worth roughly about £9,000 in 22 figures, from a burial society. Now, did this give the sisters the idea that money could be made from the dead? By 1882, a romance had started between Margaret Flanagan and Thomas Higgins, himself a widower. The pair married in October of that year. Thomas's daughter Mary, who was then age 8, sadly died within months of the wedding after just a short illness. Once again, the burial society payout was collected upon death, this time by Margaret Higgins. She'd taken out the policy on her stepdaughter Mary. Then in January 1883, Margaret Jennings, so one of the lodgers, then aged 19, also died. Strangely, her burial payout was collected by Catherine, not Margaret Jennings' father Patrick. It was actually Catherine, her landlady, who'd taken out the policy. So even though, people regularly died, death wasn't a stranger in the slums of Liverpool. There was some gossip about the death rate in that house, in that rooming house. So Catherine, Margaret and the entire kind of household moved to 105 Latimer Street and then quickly on to 27 Ascot Street. So they were kind of moving around, trying to just escape this neighbourhood gossip. Then, in September 1883, Thomas Higgins, Margaret's husband, then aged 45, became yet another member of the household to fall mysteriously ill. His stomach pains were severe enough that a Dr. Whitford was called. He attributed Thomas Higgins' illness to dysentery, related to drinking cheap whiskey, and he prescribed opium and castor oil. So opium was a regular medicine in the 19th century. Sadly, though, Higgins died after just 2 days of illness, and days later, that same doctor was contacted and asked to provide a death certificate. He did so, attributing the death to dysentery. Dysentery, again, was another common disease in that place. Although Thomas Higgins' death by apparent dysentery raised no question for the doctor, Dr. Whitford, Higgins' brother Patrick was surprised to hear Thomas, who had been strong and in good health, could have succumbed so easily and quickly to illness. Like dysentery, it's bad, but it tends to kill the very young, the very old, the vulnerable, the weak. Strong, healthy men could survive dysentery. But it didn't raise any eyebrows from the doctor. But Patrick Higgins was persistent. He thought something strange was going on. He found that his brother Thomas had been insured at 5 different burial societies. They hadn't taken out just one policy or 2 policies. They'd actually taken out 5 burial society policies, which left his widow, Margaret, with a profit of around £100, which is nearly £13,000 in today's money. So, these are not massive amounts of money. Even 13k, when you kind of pitch it against someone's life, isn't a lot of money. But for these people eking out a living in the slums of Liverpool, this was a lot of money. Now, Patrick Higgins pursued the matter with the authorities, and a post-mortem examination was ordered on Thomas Higgins' body. To the surprise of mourners, the coroner arrived at the home to perform the examination right in the middle of Higgins' wake, his funeral wake. Catherine Flanagan, though, panicked. Upon hearing that a full autopsy was to be performed, she fled. She fled the home, and she kept running for a little while. So a full autopsy of Thomas Higgins' body was complete, and evidence of arsenic poisoning was found. His organs showed traces of arsenic in quantities indicating the poisoning had taken place over several days. Evidence from the home included a bottle containing a mysterious white substance, which was examined by poison expert Dr. Campbell Brown, who verified the presence of arsenic. They also tested Margaret and Catherine's clothes, and they found some mysterious dust in Margaret's pocket of one of her jackets. And an arsenic solution containing unusual adulterants, unusual additions, were found in that bottle. That mysterious white liquid that they found in the bottle was analysed, and it was an arsenic solution, but a strange one. Margaret was arrested immediately. Catherine moved from one boarding house to another to try to avoid the police, and she got away with it for nearly a week, but eventually she was found, taken into custody in Wavertree, just outside of Liverpool. On 16th of October 1883, the sisters were formally charged with the murder of Thomas Higgins, Margaret Higgins' husband. Orders for the exhumation of the previously deceased members of the household were issued when it became clear that arsenic was the mechanism of Higgins' death. The bodies of John Flanagan, little Mary Higgins, only 8 years old, and Margaret Jennings all showed evidence of minimal deterioration or decomposition. So, these bodies have been buried for a while. They should have started decomposing. But decomposition slows down. It's a quality associated with arsenic poisoning. And traces of arsenic were found in the remains of all 3 people. Investigators initially assumed that the arsenic used to poison the victims had come from rat poison, but the adulterants in rat poison were known at the time and could be tested for, and rat poison failed to show up in the organs of these dead people. So the authorities, the poison experts, were forced to come up with a new theory. Now, Catherine and Margaret were illiterate. They were slum dwellers, and it was thought that they couldn't have acquired arsenic through methods such as visiting a chemist, knowing a scientist who would subscribe an unusual type of arsenic. They didn't think it very likely of the sisters. However, tests were done, and, the authorities were persistent in this. And eventually it was discovered that a common flypaper at the time contained arsenic, and that by soaking the flypaper in water, a solution substantially similar, including the same adulterants and it created this same mysterious white liquid found in that bottle that had been taken from the Flanagan and Higgins household. So that's what they've been doing. They've been taking fly paper used to catch flies, soaking it, and then somehow feeding this arsenic solution to their intended victims. At the time of her arrest, Catherine claimed to her solicitor that the murders were not isolated and provided a list of 6 or 7 other deaths. And in some reports, there's as many as 17 deaths attributed to the Flanagan Sisters and their associates. She claimed that the killings related to Burial Society fraud, and she provided a list of 5 other women who had either perpetrated those murders or who provided insurance to those who did. So what she was doing was spreading out the blame. She was minimising her role in this and saying, look, there's a lot of people doing this, there's a lot of people involved. She threw people under the bus in order to minimise her own crimes. Catherine's list of alleged conspirators contained 3 other women, 3 other poisoners other than herself from the slums, and 3 agents of the insurance groups who were provided payouts upon their deaths. Margaret Evans, Bridget Bedley, Margaret, her sister, were named as the co-poisoners. Margaret Potter, someone called Mrs. Fallon, don't know her first name, and Bridget Stanton were the insurers. Catherine Ryan, another woman, was alleged to have obtained the arsenic needed. According to Catherine Flanagan, Evans had been the instigator of the crime ring. So Catherine was, she was spreading out the blame. She was minimising her own involvement and saying she wasn't the main person. She wasn't the person that cooked up all of this. There's a crime ring in the slums. It's not just me. It's not just me that's doing this. There's all these other people as well. So the women Catherine alleged to have been involved with in this conspiracy all appear often in accounts of suspicious deaths in this period. Mrs. Stanton, for example, was linked to the insurance policies of 3 other deaths, and groups of 2 or more of those involved were seen visiting those who died shortly before their deaths. In one case, when an insurance company supervisor requested to meet Thomas Higgins in the course of issuing the insurance on him, he was greeted at his house by a woman who was neither Catherine Flanagan nor his wife Margaret Higgins, and they presented this other guy as Thomas, and it was only later realised upon seeing the deceased Thomas Higgins that this person that this insurance supervisor had met was an imposter. Strange. They were trying to minimise their own involvement. I don't know what they were trying to do here. Obviously there was some plan behind this. But Catherine's testimony was sometimes contradictory to both herself and to what seemed to be obvious facts of the case. In one case, for example, despite Mrs. Stanton's close links to the insurance payouts of murder victims and Catherine's identification of her as part of the conspiracy, she was exonerated. There just wasn't enough evidence. This was just Catherine's word. And Catherine had been charged with murder. They didn't believe her. There was too many inconsistencies in this story. So whether these women got away with it, they were involved and they got away with it, we'll probably never know. Ultimately, it was decided by the prosecution that while the additional deaths were likely to have been murder, it would be so difficult to prove that anyone other than Catherine or Margaret had committed any of these crimes, especially considering that the primary evidence against the other women was being provided by murderer Catherine Flanagan, who had every reason to attempt to minimise her own responsibility in these crimes. As a result, only the sisters were tried for the crimes of murdering Thomas Higgins. On Thursday, 7th of February 1884, a grand jury at Liverpool Assizes returned true bills against Catherine and Margaret for the murders by arsenic poisoning of Thomas Higgins, Margaret Jennings and John Flanagan. The trial opened at St George's Hall on Thursday, 14th of February, before Mr Justice Butt. The case of Thomas Higgins was heard first, so that one had the most evidence behind it. It took the jury only 50 minutes to reach a guilty verdict for both women. Margaret collapsed in the dock as she was sentenced. As both women had been sentenced to death, the other murder charges were not proceeded with, as was the norm at the time. You know, they take the case with the strongest evidence first, try that. If the jury finds them guilty based on that one, they're sentenced to death, there's little point in bringing other cases to trial. It's just kind of a waste of time. They're going to die anyway. So the pair were returned to jail to await execution. Bartholomew Binns, the hangman, and his assistant Samuel Heath arrived at Kirkdale Jail on the afternoon of Saturday, 1st of March. They measured the women and started the construction of the gallows. Catherine and Margaret were executed by hanging, and it was carried out 8 a.m. on Monday, 3rd of March 1884. At 7:45, the pair were taken from their condemned cells from death row to the reception room. The prison bell now started tolling as the pair were led into the prison yard. Catherine and Margaret, assisted by 2 female and 2 male warders, and finally the hangmen, Binns and Heath. It was snowing outside. Despite it being March, there was snowfall and it was really cold. Yet a large group of people gathered outside the jail to see the black flag raised and unfurled. Despite the snowfall, you know, these kind of executions got a crowd. People wanted to see justice done in its completion. Both women wore long dresses. Catherine had chosen black, possibly to suit her mood. Her sister, a dark brown one. They had to be assisted up the steps of the scaffold, but coped calmly with the preparations. They were hooded and noosed. Binns hooded Catherine, Heath, Margaret. In both cases, their necks were broken and their heart ceased to beat within about 7 minutes. And there ended the crime spree of Catherine Flanagan and her sister, Margaret Higgins. They had no shame. This was clearly premeditated, taking the lives of the people closest to them. Really horrible. And their crimes echo down the centuries in Liverpool folklore, and they're known as the Black Widows of Liverpool. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I've been Michelle. I hope you're well. There'll be another episode of Crime Stories Sunday very soon. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, guys.